Thank you all for joining us today for the second annual Girls and Women's Strategy session. It's exciting to see so many new faces as well as those who've been supporting this program since day one. And really, I must thank you all for signing up for CGI's longest session. 2.5 hours is truly a commitment, and we promise to make the best of your time today. We have an exciting agenda ahead of us. Secretary Clinton will deliver our welcoming remarks, followed by 2 short speeches. First, Valerie Jarrett, Senior Advisor to the President of the United States, and then Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the new Executive Director of UN Women. Ambassador Melanne Verveer will then lead us in a panel discussion focused on new actors, new resources, exploring sustainability for girls and women's empowerment. This conversation will be followed by an open discussion and Q&A with all of you. But before we begin, let me first explain why we are here. First, our session today is an opportunity for you to network and connect with others throughout the CGI community who are actively working to empower girls and women through their CGI commitments. As you know, CGI works to integrate the girls and women's lens throughout all of our platforms, like the annual meeting, CGI America, and others, and of course our track convenings. I hope you will connect with colleagues in your respective fields, but also connect with those working on commitments in other tracks. If you look around, you will see thought leaders representing issues ranging from energy and environmental stewardship to education and global health. Secondly, we are all here to strategize how we can make the next 3 days the most effective for identifying new allies to the movement and how to catalyze even more creative commitments to ensure that girls and women, wherever they are, can achieve their full potential. I hope that today's session will inspire new ideas and lead to unique partnerships. Now, each of you have a folder with 2 very important documents for review. The first is a 1-pager highlighting some of the exciting sessions throughout the conference with a strong girls and women's focus. The second document is a first for us. This is the first year that our Commitment to Action form has asked our members to share specifically how they're working to incorporate girls and women in the work of their commitment. On behalf of the Commitments Department, especially my colleagues, many of whom are in the back, who have worked tirelessly to support the development of all these commitments, we are proud to report that of 158 new commitments this year, 97 have a substantive girls and women's component to it. The document is organized by each CGI track, and I hope that you will spend time reviewing all of our members' efforts. Now, without further ado, it is my honor to welcome Secretary Hillary Clinton.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you. That'll be the 7th inning stretch here. I want to start by thanking Penny, who has really done a fabulous job over the last several years, bringing together many of us, reaching out and working with you and so many others to ensure that CGI represented a real commitment to women and girls. And it's been building over the last several years, and I really believe that Penny deserves a great deal of gratitude from all of us. I also want to welcome Valerie Jarrett here from the White House, who will have an exciting set of remarks and a very important announcement that she has made, which I hope she'll reiterate because it's something that I personally am delighted to hear that President Obama and Mrs. Obama and the White House will be doing next spring. I also want to welcome the new Executive Director of UN Women, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who has been a lawmaker, a minister, the Deputy President of South Africa. She's devoted her life to promoting the rights and dignity of all people. And Michelle Bachelet did a great job getting UN Women up and going. And now we're delighted that Phumzile will be the person to continue and build from strength to strength. So thank you for taking on this responsibility. In a few minutes, you'll hear from the panel that will be moderated by Ambassador Melanne Verveer, someone with whom I have worked closely on these issues now for 20 years and who has traveled endlessly around the world promoting programs, policies, changes in attitude about women and girls in a way that really reflects America's deepest values. Two other people I just want to acknowledge. My Congresswoman and dear friend, Nita Lowey, who is here. I thank her always for being on the front lines. Some of you who follow, when you can, the activities of the U.S. Congress can get a little discouraged by it, but Nita has been a champion on behalf of women and girls and development assistance in her positions in the Congress, and I'm grateful to her. I also want to acknowledge another friend who is here, the former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard. And Julia, will you stand up, please? Go ahead, please. You know, politics is a combat sport, but it's really remarkable, the dignity and integrity that Julia showed under the most relentless attacks. So before I turn this over to our next speakers and then to the panel, I just want to make a few brief points. I'm very pleased that I've been able to join with my husband and my daughter, who's also here, in furthering the work of the Clinton Foundation and certainly this initiative, which is such a highlight of our year, the Clinton Global Initiative. We're going to be talking more about the entire foundation and the work that it does, because if you look across all of our programs, the impact on women is really front and center for what we believe in and what we are trying to accomplish. In the Clinton Health Access Initiative, which started helping to get the cost of HIV/AIDS drugs treatment down, we are a leader in preventing the transmission of the virus from mother to babies and making sure that women are given the support and the treatment that they deserve to have. In the Clinton Development Initiative, we're working with farmers in Africa to increase their productivity and thereby their incomes. And we've had some really remarkable results. But since most farmers in Africa, smallholder farmers, are women, about 60% of all farmers in Africa, in fact, that is a statistic that is pretty common across the world, but not very well recognized. What we're seeing with the increase in productivity and income is that, you know, women are able finally to send their kids to school, to afford the uniforms, to afford the books, who are able to, you know, build onto their little house or maybe build the house for the first time. And when Bill and Chelsea were just in Malawi visiting our anchor farm there, which serves 21,000 household smallholder farmers, and talking to women about what a difference it was making, it was very gratifying. Through the Clinton Justra initiative, we're creating ways for poor women in Latin America, particularly in Colombia and in Peru, to have real incomes, to get into the formal economy by being able to build small businesses, and doing so by serving the needs of the communities they come from. And so in a very old-fashioned American model, taking goods that are provided for them by the initiative and going back up into the mountains or going back into the villages and selling those goods, creating more income for themselves, being able eventually, as some now have, employing other people. So women and women's livelihoods, women's empowerment, women's lives, their rights, their roles, their responsibilities have been key to what we have been doing across all of the work. And as Penny just said, here at the Clinton Global Initiative, where there are over 2,300 commitments serving approximately 430 million people with a value of about $77 billion. And what happens after the meeting is that the CGI staff works to make sure people keep their commitments. And there's a kind of report card. You know, some people, frankly, are dropped from the program because they love to have their picture taken, but they didn't produce anything. But most people really, really work hard. One of Chelsea's favorite commitments was a partnership between Procter & Gamble and World Vision to take a small packet of chemicals invented by a P&G scientist in the UK to millions of people around the world to give them clean drinking water. And so Chelsea in Burma went hours outside of Rangoon to go to a village, and then she and her dad did it in Tanzania. Well, who was the most excited? The women, the mothers, because they're the ones who carry the water. They're the ones who know that, you know, they don't have enough water or the water doesn't look clean. And eventually they've learned that it's the water which makes their babies sick. And all of a sudden, this little chemical packet is making the water safe not only for them to drink, but for Chelsea Clinton and Bill Clinton to drink as well. So this is the kind of leveraging of talents and assets, of aspirations into commitments that we think can help change people's lives for the better. And certainly here at CGI, you will hear many of the individual commitments that are going to be made over the next 3 days. Now, I'm looking out here. I see some of you who are new to CGI are coming with some very exciting commitments. And what I want to reinforce with what Penny said is that there are people in this room, and there will be people here at CGI who can help you, who can bring all kinds of experience and expertise that you then can partner with and can create something bigger than you could do on your own. You know, we are all in this together. That's kind of the slogan of our family, of our foundation, but really of how we see what we can do. And I would hope that you will work through CGI over the next several days to find partners, to think about how to deliver sustainable solutions that empower people from everywhere to live better lives. The other great thing about what CGI represents is that it truly is a partnership. It's a partnership between the private sector, it's a partnership with governments, it's a partnership with civil society, with philanthropists, with organizations and individuals who have an idea that they want to see taken to scale. And, you know, when Bill started this all those years ago now, I think it was viewed as a new kind of philanthropy, kind of an entrepreneurial philanthropy, if you will, where, you know, we didn't have a huge fortune that we could put into a foundation. It meant bringing people together who found common goals to seek common ground, in effect to go to higher ground, to make a difference in the lives of people here and far away. So I'm very excited about this CGI, mobilizing for impact. That's really what it's all about. One good idea, one person can truly transform lives for the better, even in our difficult political and budgetary environment around the world today. It is doable. We have seen it being done, and we want to plant more seeds that will grow more results for more people over the years to come. So with that, let me ask Valerie Jarrett to come forward and share with us her views. And I want to thank Valerie, who's been a stalwart partner when I was in the State Department on behalf of many things, but in particular women and girls, and has really provided so much of the impetus for the emphasis on women and girls in this administration. And I'm very glad you could join us today.
Well, thank you, Secretary Clinton, for that very kind introduction and for your outstanding leadership. Penny, This was one of the best events last year, but we were in a room about a quarter of this size, and I'm so happy to look out and see it's standing room only, so a big shout out for Penny. She's done a tremendous job. Secretary Clinton, I'm so happy to see you here because, of course, your continued leadership and your tireless advocacy on behalf of women and girls is a role model to us all. I'd also like to thank President Clinton and Chelsea Clinton for turning this into a family affair. So to the entire Clinton family, a round of applause as well, please. So when President Obama first formed the White House Council on Women and Girls by executive order early in his first term in 2009, it was the intent that every agency of the federal government, and I mean every agency, would place as its top priority removing barriers to opportunity for women and girls in every program, every policy, and every piece of legislation we support. Because, as the President put it earlier this year, when women succeed, nations are safer, more secure, and more prosperous. I can't tell you what a relief it is to work for a president who gets it, who understands the importance of women's issues, and who approaches them not just as president, but as a loving husband, a son, a grandson, a father of 2 devoted little girls, and really a son of a single mom. Now, he's a pretty busy guy, as you might expect, but he does insist upon having dinner every night he can with his daughters and his wife. It's one of the perks, I suppose, of commuting 30 seconds from the office. And remember, he's been outnumbered for a number of years. Not only does he have his daughters and his wife, but he's got his mother-in-law as well. And so it is no surprise that he anticipates the importance of valuing women and girls. With the President's steadfast support and the help of his cabinet and entire administration, working together with outstanding partners in the private sector, public sector, not-for-profit sector, many of who are here today, there is no denying that we have already made a great deal of progress towards equality. But, as many have said, you should only measure progress by how far we have left to go. And that's why we're here today. Because tackling the global economic challenges of our time will require the full and complete inclusion of women and girls in our strategy. And we can only do that when we're freeing our workplaces from discrimination, ensuring opportunities for advancement of everyone, and eliminating the threat of violence. With the help of many of you, the Obama administration has taken bold actions on all fronts, from creating programs that promote the full and inclusive financial capabilities of women to ensuring that more women are seated at the table during peace negotiations. In fact, we often imagine what it would be like if Congress was made up of half women, right, Congresswoman? You and me both. Just imagine what we might get done. There is also, of course, our ongoing commitment to the Equal Futures Partnership, which was created to eliminate barriers to women in their economic and political empowerment. 1 year ago, here in New York, I had the privilege of launching Equal Futures together with Secretary Clinton, and we were joined then by 12 founding partner nations. Earlier this afternoon, Secretary Kerry, Ambassador Kathy Russell, and I convened a meeting of the Equal Futures Partnership, and we welcomed now 23 additional nations in just 1 year. That's an impressive expansion of our agenda. All who have joined together with a number of new private sector partners to figure out how we can focus on women in the economy and in politics. We discussed each nation's substantial accomplishments and the job that lies ahead, and I have to tell you, at the end of it, I felt extremely hopeful that so many people would come together from different countries, all with a singular focus on improving the lives of women and girls. One of the key successes here in the United States has been matching tens of thousands of young women with mentors in science and technology and engineering and math. We have supported women entrepreneurs at all stages of their life. And we have backed programs which help women and girls begin to think that they're supposed to run for office. Setting high expectations of our girls is a key to success. and you can't begin that too early. Another exciting step, which Secretary Clinton alluded to, is coming next spring, when President Obama intends to convene a White House summit on working families. This will be an opportunity to elevate the national conversation around designing today's workplace so that everyone can thrive, not just some. From working parents who shouldn't have to choose between staying home with a sick child and losing their job, to businesses striving to improve their bottom lines through increased productivity, to the longtime blue-collar worker who is just looking for the pay that she so rightly deserves. Workers like Amanda McMillan. Amanda worked as a secretary for Forest City Grocery Company in Arkansas, doing many of the same duties as male salespeople, but being paid less. Despite Amanda's repeated requests for promotion, she was told by Forest City, now get this, that the job of a salesman was too dangerous for a woman, and that she wouldn't be a good mom if she was out on the road meeting with customers. You kind of wonder what century we're in. But with the help of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, she sued her company for sex discrimination, and when she asked why she pursued the case, and I love this quote, Amanda said, "I'm doing this because it was wrong, and I could never look my girl, my own daughter, in the face and then tell her that living in America, she could be anything she wanted to be." Forest City Grocery paid $150,000 in monetary damages and agreed to stop any of their employment practices towards their employees and provide ongoing training for the managers who had been engaged in discrimination. Amanda did the work. She made the ask, which, by the way, is something more women need to do. And don't worry about being called pushy. Don't want to digress, but do ask for that promotion if you think you were deserving of it. Men don't hesitate. She did all of that, and when she didn't receive what she earned, she took a stand and asked the federal government to help protect her rights. Amanda is just the type of person who should inspire us all to fight for equality for all of our women and girls, the kind of people that President Obama likes to call our silent heroes, the men and women who quietly breathe life into society. As the President said last month at the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, the arc of the moral universe may bend towards justice, but it does not bend on its own. It does not bend on its own. And that's why I am so thankful for the work being done by CGI. And all of you who are here today, you are bending that arc by putting your shoulder to the metal each and every day, crafting a brighter future for women and girls. And we look forward to our ongoing partnership. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jarrett. And now it's my extreme pleasure to introduce Ms. Mlambo-Ngcuka to the stage. As Secretary Clinton mentioned, she was just appointed the Executive Director of UN Women in July, and in August took charge of the organization, which leads the UN's efforts towards women's empowerment and gender equality. She's a human rights advocate throughout her entire life, and as Secretary Clinton mentioned, she's had leadership positions in civil society and government, and that role as Deputy President of South Africa was the first time a woman held that position. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Penny, and congratulations. Secretary Clinton, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here, and congratulations for convening us in this manner and for the achievement and the results that we're already seeing. This is my first month at UN Women, and indeed it is great that I'm able to start my month by getting these wonderful ideas, which I'm going to steal for UN Women. We are in the 21st century. There's a lot of expectations from women that this will be a different century. Coming from Africa, there's also a lot of expectations that the 21st century will also be Africa's century. So as a woman and an African, This has got to be my century. And I'm having it with you. At UN Women, I come in with a vision that I think we all share. Firstly, I'd like to strengthen the partnerships with people such as we have in this house. I'd like to start by endorsing and appreciating the good work that was done by my predecessor, Madam Michelle Bachelet. There are great priorities that make up the work of UN Women, and these are ending violence against women, which affects 1 in 3 women worldwide in 2013, protecting and supporting women in conflict and post-conflict areas, and fully involving women in peace and security work, advancing women's economic empowerment, supporting gender-aware budgeting and planning in countries, expanding women's leadership and participation in politics and in society in general, advancing the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals, and reducing the poverty in women and the societies in which our women live. And of course, to do all of this, I intend to work in a collaborative manner with all UN agencies, within the UN, outside the UN, public sector, member states, civil society, private sector, men and boys. It is my desire that the work that we do must expand the support system and the support base for women's work. In working with women and girls, it is important for me to start with the issue of access to education as a foundation that can sustainably change the quality of life of girls. And of course, UN Women is not a provider of education, but we can lean on the institutions that have got the expertise and the resources to advance the cause of education. I think we're all aware that in the Millennium Development Goals, we have been able to send a lot of girls to schools. The enrollments went very high, especially for those poor countries that started at a very low base. We saw lots of girls going to school for the first time, but we lost a lot of the girls along the way because the dropout rate has been high. The quality of education has not been as high as we wanted it to be. So in some sense, what we gained in quantity, we lost in quality. And in the next phase, focus on quality is going to be very important, and addressing the issue of dropout also important. We need to encourage girls that have dropped out, who have not been able to go to secondary education, to go back, because otherwise it's a revolving door. Those girls that never go back to school just make an appointment with poverty for the rest of their lives and for the next generation. I'm emphasizing education because if we're talking about breaking the cycle of poverty decisively and ensuring that from one generation to the other, in each family, we actually make sure that the next generation in that family will be better, it will have to be through education, by and large, linked to economic empowerment. The other area of emphasis, which is not an area in which we have competency as UN Women, but we've got passion and we work in, it is reproductive health and rights. We lean on the other institutions of the UN that have the expertise, UNFPA, WHO, to address this matter. Because if women cannot control their bodies, cannot decide when they want to have children, we know, again, we lose the game. So it's, again, an important foundation that is important for the work that we do for women's work, for women's UN Women. And I am also very passionate about women's economic empowerment. If we can address education, we can sort out reproductive health and rights, we are then on the go because we can provide economic empowerment for women. It is through those strengths that women will be able to fight against poverty, to stand for leadership, and to make a difference. And my God, what a different world it would be, not just for women, but for whole humanity. We remember that women are half of humanity, 3.6 billion. As a new organization of the UN, much smaller than most of the institutions in every way, budget, people, we have a big job. And wherever I go, I want to remind people that we actually are the most important agency of the UN. Do you agree? But as we grow and look at ways in which we are going to build ourselves, we don't have time to waste and stand in front of women and complain and whinge. We are depending on you, and I liked the way Secretary Clinton explained the power of networking, of collaborating, because together we can leverage a lot. Through you, we will be able to mainstream women's work. So while we try and sort out stuff, we want to expect you to be the ones that are helping us to address the issues that affect girls and women. So I want to look at a day where education, and it mustn't be too far, is available for all girls and boys, no matter who they are and no matter where they are. And this can be done through technology. And this is where our private sector, gigs, young and old, come in, because some of these solutions already exist today. It's the collective will, it's our convening power that we actually need in order to make sure that we marshal all of these resources in the right direction. I want to touch on the issue that sometimes we don't talk enough about, women in conflict. And again, we have one of the women who leads us in that area, Mary Robinson, who's working in the Great Lakes. I think sometimes we forget what happens to women in those situations. Women are victims. Whenever there's a war, we just have to think about what is happening in Syria now, but somehow their plight is very silent and forgotten. Children are victims, and when there is peacemaking, somehow women also get pushed aside. And yet, the capacity for women to be peacemakers, to nurture the peace, to protect it, to build bridges is significant. We are therefore embracing the issue of peacemaking, of involving women, and working collaboratively with all of the institutions in the UN that are working in that area. And would like to ask you to also remember that this is a major issue for women. It is about women, it is for women, and it is important to involve women in every area where there is a conflict. Few days ago, a report of the Broadband Commission was released. It highlighted, that particular working group was the working group on gender. It highlighted the different types of exclusions and the gender gap that impact women in ICT. It also highlighted what we could benefit as society, as economies, in GDP and growth if we were able to embrace and involve women. Again, I'm just urging, to the extent that there are people who work in that area here, for us to put back our gender lenses when we are looking at ICT. It is not a gender-neutral industry, and yet it has so much that it can offer women. Girls can learn at home where it is difficult for them to go to school. Women can run their home offices at home and make money, which in many ways they would be able to determine would enable them to close the gender gap, because this is means of production. They will be able to sell their labor at the rates that they determine. And the challenge that we face in every country, democracies, rich and poor, of the wage gap would be closed somehow. Because in many of our countries, we've got great constitutions where discrimination of women is not allowed. But yet, in the same countries, we still find the discrimination when it comes to pay. So we need to find mechanisms where we give women tools where they're able to determine their lives and fight back where there are these discriminations. Now I want to highlight something that is a moment in history, pre-2015, because we still have some time. And if there's things that we can do and finish, maternal health being one that comes into most of our minds, taking girls, as many as possible, to school between now and then also comes to mind. But also there is post-2015. For us at UN Women, getting that one goal is important. That goal which focuses on women, and at the same time, mainstreaming women's issues in all other goals. We are going into 2015 also at the same moment as Beijing plus 20. So there is a nexus of Beijing plus 20, of post-2015. There's got to be something that we could do for women which is unforgettable, something that is destiny-changing for women, because we've worked so hard We have created instruments, but I'm not going to go to a woman in Uganda and say, these are the documents that we have signed on your behalf. Where are the treasures? Ba-ba-ba-bam. Women want us to give them some things that are concrete. And these things are somewhere in these documents that we have signed. And I know that there's a lot of willpower amongst the member states because they created us as UN women. So there is something that they want to achieve. But we just need to jump just a little bit higher and together. There's a saying in Africa which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go further, go together. Let's go together and let's jump high. I come from a country which knows international solidarity. Apartheid could never have been defeated if it was not for global solidarity. From heads of states to school children, there was unity of purpose and we were able to deliver a blow on apartheid. This moment has come for the struggle of women. And I need you. I'm making a personal appeal. I need you to make this agenda work. 2015 has got to be a decisive year for women of the world and for girls. And I thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much. And with that, we get to kick off our exciting panel. I would love to first introduce our moderator, Ambassador Melanne Verveer. She is a former U.S. Ambassador for Global Women's Issues, but most importantly, she's a friend to all of us that work in this space. Melanne, please join us. I'd like to invite our first speaker, Theo Sowa, who is the CEO of the African Women's Development Fund, a grant-making foundation that supports local, national, and regional women's organizations working towards the empowerment of African women and the promotion and realization of their rights. Theo, thank you for joining us. We next have Mr. François-Henri Pinault, who is the chairman and CEO of Kering, a world leader in apparel and accessories which develops an ensemble of luxury and sport and lifestyle brands such as Gucci. Mr. Pinault is an advisory board member of Chime for Change, a new global campaign for girls and women's empowerment founded by Gucci. Please join us. And then we have Minister Ploumen, who is a Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation in the Netherlands. The minister has long been a champion for gender equality and women and girls' empowerment, both nationally and internationally. As minister, she gives specific priority for eliminating violence against women and ending child marriage, which are part of the Netherlands' long-term commitment to promote women's rights. Thank you.
Well, it's wonderful to, is this on? It's on? It's on. Always happens. It's wonderful to look out and see so many who have been committed for so long. All of you fellow travelers, especially want to thank our dear Secretary Clinton and Chelsea for the ongoing, unstinting leadership and commitment they bring to this, to all of the distinguished leaders who've been mentioned. And I think it's fair to say to our new UN Women head that we are going together. And this panel represents going together, and it represents the essence of the Clinton Global Initiative. Because we have with us a representative of government, a minister with a most interesting, innovative portfolio. We have with us a CEO and chairman of a company that represents a host of brands and is eminently successful. And we have with us a longtime friend of mine and a wonderful NGO leader who has been long working with women in the field. And I think this combination is what Secretary Clinton often has referred to as the three legs of the stool. Government, the private sector, and civil society represented here with an NGO all working together. And one of the reasons that Penny has thought through this panel, I think, so well, and I want to add my thanks to her because, as each and every one of you knows, she is eminently accessible. She is very generous with her time, and she has been a true friend on this issue. But as she was thinking through this with her colleagues and the leadership here, it is a time of opportunity. And I would say with Phumzile that opportunity comes at a threshold moment, almost 20 years since Beijing. The rethinking of or the building on the MDGs and what all of that represents to progress. It also is a time, because it is a pivotal moment, of opportunity. I believe a great deal of the opportunity that we confront in this space has to do with the leadership of Secretary Clinton, who I can tell you firsthand has gone from villages around the world, standing by the girls and women, putting a spotlight on what's working in their lives, and then going to the presidential palaces where the decisions get made to say to them, this is the smart thing to do, and you really need to be doing more. So the opportunity we confront together, as well as the ongoing challenges. We read the headlines, excuse me, and we wonder if the reversals are going to take hold or if progress is going to be consolidated. And we have a lot of work to do. So that's the spirit of this conversation with three extraordinary people. We are going to talk for some 30 minutes or so, and then the conversation is yours. For your comments, your questions, anything you want to say. We're all a family going at this together, and we really want to get out on the table what are better ways that we can work successfully, and how can we take this to another level. So let me start with properly with protocol to our governmental minister here, who has been, I've had a lot of fun reading her speeches, I have to confess, because I share her biases. Maybe that's why. But she is the Minister for Trade and Development. Now put those two things together. They rarely are put together, and there's good reason they have been put together. She has been talking about and acting accordingly to bring more creative ways to address these issues with new players. We confront new problems. And she has said that government is no longer the major player and that the business community is not a Trojan horse. And in many ways, the Clinton Global Initiative is an initiative that recognizes that we all have to be in this together. So I think for starters, it would be good to hear from the minister about how she sees this space and what new ways we need to bring to the table.
Yeah, thank you very much for that nice introduction. I think bringing aid and trade together is really a very timely combination. What I've been seeing for the past 20, 30 years, being an activist myself, I think that's a good way to start a career, by the way. Being an activist myself, I've seen how important both social as well as economic empowerment are. I used to be the director of Mama Cash, and we very much supported women entrepreneurship. And the hurdles that we needed to take were both within, for example, financial institutions, but also within women themselves and in the communities of women. And what you see is that now bringing economic and social empowerment together, as I'm doing in my portfolio, it offers many opportunities. It offers the opportunity for small-scale women farmers to engage in a local and regional economy. And I take it upon myself to advocate for those women, not only advocating for violence against them, but also to try and make sure that they can own the land that they work on, that no one is taking their rights to the land away from them. to make sure they can protect their daughters and pay the school fees for their daughters, to make sure that on a macroeconomic level, free trade agreements are really leaning into their needs and interests as well. And taking that last remark, if I may, I think one of the issues that the women's movement at this time is really neglecting, and I'm asking for your help here, is engage more in all those macroeconomic issues that are on the table. Free trade agreements, I come from the Netherlands, we live from free trade, so I'm a strong advocate for it. But I love fair free trade. And for fair free trade to become a reality, I need your help, because women's organizations have been neglecting that element of what can be a real driver of change for all women everywhere. So that would be my first plea, actually. Then my second plea would be to try and encourage yourself and all of us to step out of all those little spaces that we made for ourselves. As you rightly say, I mean, this is what life is. NGOs, private sector, government, we all have to take upon ourselves our role. And I think sometimes we are standing a little bit back to each other still, even though we're sitting here very amicably. I think you need to call on me, because as a representative of a government, I do have a responsibility to encourage all those different sectors of society to come together. And this is one of, I have many ambitions, of course, for this period that I'm allowed to be a government minister. But one of them is to bring government, activists, private sector, universities together to work on the issue of economic empowerment in this new world. There's new issues, there's a lot of opportunities. 7 out of 10 fastest growing economies for the next years are in Africa. But I don't believe in trickle-down effects, and I'm sure you don't. So we need to work on inclusive growth, and that's, I would say, a joint agenda.
Well, and for what it's worth, Minister, one of the things that Secretary Clinton did over the last 4 years working within our government, more broadly in the administration, is to focus on women in trade, particularly to take those trade agreements, whether they were the Africa Growth Opportunity Act or many agreements with Latin American countries, and enable women to participate for the first time in being export ready. So we agree with you 100% on that. Theo, you have, rightly, I think, bemoaned often the divorce between women's voices and a lot that goes on in this space, the actual reality of those everyday lives and the wisdom that women possess, and then what emanates from that that may be contrary to that. At the same time, you have reminded us that women are agents of change, and too often we focus on women as victims, and we can't see them beyond victimhood. So can you, from your experience, tell us, because you work at the nexus of women's rights and philanthropy, which is very interesting all across Africa. So tell us what your perspective has to say for the wider work that this room represents.
Okay, in 2 minutes, no. No. I think for me, like the other people on this panel, the real opportunity that this room represents is the opportunity to work together. One of the things that we've learned at the African Women's Development Fund is that if you continue to work in silos, if people continue to see women and girls as individual problems, education's a problem, health is a problem, this is a problem, that's a problem, you don't change. And where we see the most change is when people work together and work in really integrated ways and in holistic ways to actually change what's happening on the ground. And that's what's so important, I think, with this grouping that's here, because all of us in different sectors have certain strengths, but we also have certain weaknesses. And when you look at the changes that really have worked, they've worked when people have worked together. So let me give an example. We were speaking earlier, and I was saying to you about one of the really inspirational changes that I saw happening on the ground happened when the Clinton Foundation worked with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, two philanthropic organizations, looking at the issue of pediatric ARVs, treatment for children who are dying from HIV/AIDS, because when people went out and looked at cutting the price of treatment for HIV/AIDS, they basically looked at adults. And as a result, the price of ARVs for children was so high that many governments weren't able to afford to buy the medicines for the children. Now, the great thing about that partnership was that business acumen, which was held by the Clinton Foundation and CIF, were joined together, and they went out and basically cut the price of HIV/AIDS drugs for children. As a result, governments who'd been having to make some really horrendous choices were able to afford to buy those drugs for children. And the number of children's lives that were saved were enormous. But the most important thing about it for me was that the whole thing started with the people on the ground. And actually, it started with the women, because it was women in communities who'd been looking after families. It was women who were pointing out that it was no point trying to keep the men and themselves alive if all the children died. It was women who pointed out that the drugs weren't being bought because governments couldn't afford it. And so it was the community organizations, it was women on the ground who actually gave the wisdom and the analysis, which enabled the philanthropic organizations to go out, work with the private sector, cut the prices of the drugs, and save children's lives. It was a really simple thing, and it didn't take very long, and there are millions of children alive now who otherwise wouldn't have been.
Thank you. So, Francoise, why does a company that represents so many luxury brands invest in this space? You know, even more significantly, much of your work is to deal with violence against women and girls, which is a very tough challenge, which you find many a company recoiling from addressing those kinds of issues because they're hard issues. And sometimes they may even breed more controversy. Yet you're there, you're working on these issues. And why are you in that space? What do you feel you bring to this, to the outcomes? And why should other companies be invested in these issues as well?
Well, first of all, everything relies on one strong belief, and like the Clinton Initiative, which is a family adventure, my company is a family adventure, and I've been raised when it comes to this company, beside the creation of wealth, we have to have a mission that is a non-profit mission as a company. That's part of the responsibility of the company. So we've always been involved in non-profit missions as a company. When I come on board in 2005, 2006, I was reviewing our involvement in different non-profit missions, and I was looking at what makes sense, because I deeply believe, and this is the experience of a private company, if you want things to last, it has to resonate with who you are as a company and who you are as a business. So my company now is about 30,000 people, with 60% women, and we are selling to the extent of 80% of our customers to women. So women is at the core of our company. On the other side, it is much more personal. At the same period of time, I was meeting with my wife, who became my wife, Salma, who's been involved very much against violence. She has her own foundation, and she's been very, very active in that field. And she made me aware of the reality of that scandal, because it's really a scandal. I was, like I think many people, thinking that this issue was much more linked with emerging countries and not too much about developing countries like France, where I live. And I discovered that even in my own country, every 3 days, a woman dies of domestic violence. Because of the history of France, another example, and immigration, on the French territory, every year, between 3,000 to 5,000 young girls are excised. You don't know about that when you live in France. So, and as simple as I'm a father of 2 girls, 2 boys and 2 girls, and it was the link. Who we are as a company, that real issue that is not getting enough consideration from all the stakeholders, the public sphere, private companies. So I think it is where we can, as a private corporation, be very efficient and trying to make a real difference. So we decided to go really, as the one and only mission of my company on that cause of women, and more specifically through that foundation that we created in 2009, which is the Kering Foundation for Women, fight against violence and make a better life for women.
So how do you... So how do you collaborate on this issue? You work with other NGOs on the ground?
Yes, there's 2 dimensions. One is our external action, and this is through our foundation. So we finance a project directed to the women cause, mostly on domestic violence, and we need to work with NGOs. We've been working with more than 50 NGOs for the last 4 years. We've been reaching, I think it's 140,000 women that has been reached through our actions. So we're capable of raising awareness, we're capable of raising funds, but we need NGOs for action. Those problems are very complex. If you go directly, and it's probably the weakness of private corporations thinking that they can do things alone. It's not true, not on that field. You need expertise that are far beyond what you think you can do as a company. So we need to work with NGOs very closely to make sure that we reach the maximum efficiency on what we want to do.
And Theo, you were saying that so often companies or businesses or other actors come in, think they know all of the answers, and really don't work closely with the NGO community.
And I think that that's true. And I think that one of the real issues is that people have very good intentions, and those intentions should be honored. But if you really want to make it work, then you have to recognize what you don't know. And I think that that's what's so good about what you're saying, that you actually, the things that you're very good at, and the things and the ideas as well that you can bring into that whole area of violence against women, which might change what's been happening there. But the important thing is recognizing that the context in which women live and the context in which those changes have to take place are contexts where groups themselves have been working. And one of the things that when you were speaking that I was thinking about is actually also the private sector needs to be a little bit careful, because there can be a tendency to go for NGOs who know how to speak your language, and they may not be the best organizations. We've got a lot of women's rights organizations that have been working in communities for many, many years and having some really good successes. They may not speak the same language, and because they don't, they may not get the money, because a bigger group with better, flashy graphics and the great tagline comes in.
You're so right about that. And then the only answer that we found is to hire ourselves people coming from NGOs. So at the helm of my foundation or at the everything that is linked to non-profit mission inside the group, we hired people coming from all the public sphere or from NGOs to make sure that we dialogue in the most efficient way.
No, and I think that, what I love about what you're saying is that violence against women is not an easy topic to deal with. And sometimes people go for the easier options. And I'm not saying that the easier options aren't good. We need all of the options. But it's really important to try and tackle those really difficult issues which aren't glamorous. And I think that's the difference between the private sector acting with integrity in this field and the instances where the private sector doesn't act with such integrity, where someone digs a well and paints the village the color of their company. And that's not, that's advertising. So I think it's really important to really try and hold on. And I love that you're looking at rights issues and issues which are about the wider context, because if we want to make this sustainable, if we want to make the changes sustainable and not ad hoc, then we have to look not just at individual initiatives, but at the whole context in which we're working. We need to change the ground in order for this to be long-term and for us to see success in the long term.
So it's not just collaborating, it's how one collaborates.
Absolutely.
And Minister, how do you and government partner with the private sector or with civil society?
Yeah, let me first say something to that last remark on how important it is to not only work with NGOs that speak, the language and have the sexy graphics. This is one of the reasons that the Dutch government supports leadership programs for women. We will invest the coming 3 years 80 million euro in a program for women's leadership to strengthen women's organizations, not necessarily so that all of us can speak, talk the talk and all of that, but that women's organizations are ready to step in that arena, and that you are, not you personally, but that the private, well, maybe also, but that the private sector is ready to listen to you, not because you speak the language that they want to hear, but because you have a story to tell that relates to the issues that you want to relate to too. So I think that that's one. The second is that I'm reframing actually the policy on how to support civil society organizations in the Netherlands and in other countries. What we've been doing now, what I want to do and what I'm going to do actually, is to form more strategic partnerships with civil society and fund their lobby and advocacy practices, not so much their service delivery activities, which, as you said, are also very important. I mean, delivering good education to girls is really a key challenge. Other donors will be able and willing to do that. So I thought I need to do something. My government needs to add to civil society work something that is much more difficult for them to get funding for. So I will fund all kinds of advocacy and lobby programs and organizations that have to do with aid and trade, women's rights, responsible water management, and some of those other sectors. So we're really looking at, taking a next step in that one. Working with the private sector, well, this is very interesting because I'm also the Minister of Trade. So I also go to trade missions. I'm selling my country and the private sector of the Netherlands, which actually is in all fields really top of the bill, I could say, especially in water management and what have you. But it's very interesting to see. Now I'm changing the rhythm, if you wish, of those trade missions. I don't want to talk exclusively to other companies and the private sector in the country that I visit, not only to government representatives, but I also invite NGOs to come with me. I want to meet with NGOs, and many of the people who travel with me, coming from the private sector, they really, really value and appreciate that because it brings them into in contact with spheres of a country that they didn't know. So we had a wonderful conversation with young men and women in Ethiopia on their dreams and what they wanted with their lives. And the entrepreneurs that traveled with me and that had experience in Ethiopia, they said, well, this is a totally different way of looking at this country, and it enriches my knowledge, and it makes me a better partner to the people of Ethiopia to work with them. So I think this is one of the newer ways of bringing very practical. I mean, it's not about long-term strategies and all that, but very practically bringing people together, working with people together. And to conclude, maybe one of the examples that's very close to my heart is my work with the ready-made garment industry in Bangladesh, where the Netherlands has been able to take up a leadership role in coordinating all the efforts that are being done by the Bangladeshi government, the ILO, other donors, amongst them the US, but also the UK. We just today signed a memorandum of understanding on that. It's a sector where 4 million women and girls earn a living, and we all want them to earn a decent living. And for me, it's being the Minister of Aid and Trade, it's relatively easy to bring those two spheres of life together, work with the private sector, the textile sector, both in the Netherlands and internationally, but also with NGOs and government. And so I think this way of working will prove to be, I'm sure it will prove to be effective and efficient, and will be able to bring more people together than used to be possible. So it's not that complicated. It just has to be done.
No, those are very practical and at the same time innovative ways of going at it. And you had motioned to one of our audience members here in the front, and it's Secretary Greening is here from DFID, and we're happy to have you here too. We have very little time for the panel, but in this last round, let me just touch on the issue of women's economic entrepreneurship. It's been mentioned some, but it's obviously a big area. I know each of you is committed deeply to the importance of women's economic progress for what it represents. And it's also a major interest of many in this audience. In fact, tomorrow, Secretary Clinton will be announcing one of the major, almost we call it the mega commitment, because it has so many individuals, foundations, companies involved in it. And it does focus on what companies are doing as well as their other colleagues to enhance women's opportunities, economic opportunities. Just maybe very quickly, each of you, what are one or two ways that you have found, and we'll start with you, Theo, that really have moved this engine forward in equipping women with a greater degree of economic independence, and why it's important?
I think it's hugely important to have the economic security, partly on an individual level, because everybody has a certain level of dignity and pride and prefers to be able to define their own security rather than to be dependent on others. But also in the work that we've done, one of the things that we found is that economic security can really underlie so many other things. People talk about political participation, but actually the best political participation we've been able to leverage is when women have enough economic security. When they are sending their children to school, they start asking questions about why there aren't books in school. When they have got money and are in the community, they start asking questions about why the land is being sold out from under their feet. So economic security, when women can stop worrying about putting food on the table every single day, actually can be a real leverage to political participation. It can be of real assistance when it comes to some of the issues around violence against women. It really can contextualize and enable them to use their own strengths in order to move on. And I think that one of the other important things about that economic security is it helps people stop looking at women as victims. And one of the things, sorry, slight digression, I wanted to say is how important it is not to look at women and girls and just see problems. And for African women, that's happened over and over again. And then people stop listening. So I think that economic security, the dignity that it can bring, and the way in which it actually cuts through other social ills is really important for us to tackle.
Excellent. Francoise?
Yes, but fighting against violence, it's also what do you do before and after violence. And when it's before and after, it comes to empowerment of women. And we've been quite active on that field. And the most important event we've been doing came from Frida Giannini, the creative director of Gucci, when she came to me 1 year ago with the idea of Chime for Change, and with the idea of raising awareness and raising money to empower women to be before violence, let's put it this way. And this big initiative is a matter of putting together all the stakeholders, the public sphere, NGOs, private foundation, private corporation together on a big event that took place in Wembley, the huge concert. We reached 1 billion people in the world by using new technology. Facebook was around the table, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, P&G, the Earth magazines, and all those guys together with Gucci, we were able not only to raise awareness, but to raise money using the Catapult crowdfunding platform to raise 4.5 million. We've been able to help 250 projects around women and around empowering women to avoid violence or to make sure that it doesn't start again. Because another issue is what do you do after the violence occurred?
So the connection is big.
Yeah, maybe two examples of what we've been doing in that area. One, I was in New Delhi a couple of weeks ago talking to an audience of first-generation women students. I'm a first-generation student myself, so I felt very much at home. And what we will support that university in is coming up with courses for entrepreneurship for their students, real professional encouragement on how to set up your own business and do it like seriously. I hate this concept of women having small businesses and doing something on the side. I mean, when one starts a business, one has to be a professional, and that needs to start at university or at college. So that's one. And the second is we will have a Dutch Good Growth Fund, a fund where we offer opportunities for small and medium entrepreneurs, both from the Netherlands as well as in 66 other countries, where we will support their businesses, specifically where they are not able to get their businesses financed by the traditional or mainstream sector, because the country is regarded as too risky. The entrepreneurs' credentials are considered to be too risky. Sometimes that happens when you're a woman, as a sole fact. And we will invest 750 million euros over the next 4 years in that. There will be thank you, it will not be exclusively for women, but there's an award there if you're a woman entrepreneur. So really encouraging women entrepreneurs to make use of that fund. So spread the word, I would say.
So two big obstacles you're addressing: access to business training as well as access to finance, which is a very big one. So we're going to move now to all of you to join this conversation. I'm going to ask Chelsea if she wants to make a comment or ask a question before you have to leave us.
Oh, well, hello. Melanne. Is that? Oh, thank you, Melanne, and thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to Penny and to everyone in the room. I have a question for Thea, but also for all of the panel, including Melanne. I was struck when you appreciated Francois' focus on an unglamorous issue. So I'm curious what other issues you think are unglamorous and need attention that currently we may be neglecting out of shame, disinterest, or unawareness.
Okay. I think that there are a few unglamorous issues. I think that the issues that are linked very specifically to rights that people can't count become very difficult. Violence against women has been difficult for the private sector, I think, because people tend to want easier cells. But I think there are also certain health issues, particularly affecting women, that become ignored. I think that the other almost neglected area, or a few different neglected areas, we talk a lot about entrepreneurship. My worry sometimes is that when private sector and sometimes philanthropic organizations go in and talk about supporting women entrepreneurs, they're not doing it in a very long-term way. One of the things that's been worrying us on the ground is going in and seeing women who've been given small amounts of money to set up business enterprises. Nobody's working with them on issues of health, safety, hygiene, and it's only a matter of time before we start seeing some really horrendous accidents happening as a result of that. But it's much easier for people to talk about the entrepreneurship side than to actually talk about how do you deal with health and safety issues for women. So I think that those things become difficult. And as I said, some of the advocacy issues, some of the things that are harder to measure, but which are really important, because for another quick example, secondary education. People talk a lot about scholarships for girls to be in secondary school, and they are really important. I think education is, if ever you're going to come to a magic bullet, that's the closest we're going to get. But if you just do the scholarships for girls in secondary education, what you're not dealing with is the fact that there's a school system that may be failing them. And we keep hearing stories of girls being physically abused at school, being emotionally abused at school, going to school and not being able to be at school for at least a week every month because the facilities aren't there to take care of them. Nobody's done the work with the teachers on the girls' rights to protection, to development, and to all of those other things. That work has to be done. The context has to be changed in order for the scholarships for the girls to work.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Health, education, and justice are three areas where we don't talk enough. And coming back to Champ for Change, it was the three themes that were elected to be where we focus all our actions with the money we raised. Because it's true that when it comes to health issues or justice issues for women, there's not much about that. So, but I want to raise also something, because as a private company, what's the situation of women at work? This is a completely different subject, but let's face it, corporation has been created by, for, and following the rules of men. And women has to adapt for years and years and years. What if you think differently of what a company should do to cope with the reality of a woman's life, starting by maternity, for instance, which is always a drama in a company, and it's been years and years. Why? Let's really work on that. Another issue is women's on leadership position. When you talk to other CEOs, everyone agrees that there is no reason why women shouldn't be at par with men on top position in but the reality is not there. Even in my group, it's not there. It's 35%. We have 60% of women. We have 35% of women on executive position, and 25 at governance, key governance position. And you need to dig on why this. And just to give you symbolic things, when you try to hire for a key position in corporation, you do hire from the outside. And when you do hire from the outside, you use a search firm. And from the really beginning of that process, things are based by the fact that the database used by search firm are not balanced between men and women. We did that with the search firm we work with in Paris, run only by women, and they realized, by looking at why that they had 65% of their database were men. So just by imposing a rule that we want on the first step, which is candidates from the database, we want 50% of men, 50% of women. And you start to change things. So it's little by little. And another point is, think of the way women express their professional ambition. It's not like men. A study shows that if you were to fulfill 10 criteria to think that you're ready to move forward, women will wait until they fulfill 8 out of 10. Men will express their ambition at 5. If you're not aware of that, when you do your annual interviews with your key women, you don't detect the right ones. As simple as that. So it's simple, but it's not glamorous. But you need to address this as a private corporation.
But this whole issue of looking at the practices within a company, both its internal practices with respect to women in the workforce, management, boards, etc., and then the external.
I agree with everything that has been said, obviously. But let me add, although the women's movement and others have been advocating very strongly the past 20, 30 years, I still think that reproductive and sexual rights for women, access to free and to safe and legal abortion are still issues that are very difficult to debate. And I think this is an encouragement to all of us, because I think we need that agenda on top of our lists. Also, the coming years, also in what's been called, in a kind of code language, the post-2015 process, which is about, how are we going to make sure that poverty is eradicated also in 2030. And I think as long as women and girls are not the manager of their own bodies, their own sexuality, we will keep on lagging behind. So we have a responsibility to ourselves, to our daughters, but to all women of the world.
Can I just add something quickly to that? I think the other side of that is how we work on reproductive health issues in a way that comes from the women who actually should be dictating the agenda, because only too often we have this agenda that's imposed and then we wonder why it doesn't work. But when you actually talk to women and to groups of girls and you give them enough space, you give them information, you give them the ability to make the changes in their own lives and to say, this is how we want it done, then we can see some real change. So I think it needs to stay on the agenda. And we as foundations and governments and private sector people who are investing money, we need to learn to do it differently. We need to learn to listen and then invest in the way that the women want.
Agreed.
I will just say very quickly, because of the time, I would add two issues to this range of issues that require additional investments. One is the importance of research and data to make our case, particularly for women to be at the table as actors, to prevent, participate in the negotiations, and move communities in post-conflict to post-conflict reconstruction and rebuilding. They desperately need to be in this space. Many governments have adopted, as the United States finally has, a national action plan on women, peace, and security, but there is a critical need here to enable the case to be made and to help women in these situations. Secondly, the whole area of what's happening in terms of the reversals of progress or the difficulties in some places, particularly in very entrenched conservative cultures where religion has often been hijacked. What the women have said repeatedly in those circumstances is help us corral the arguments in the context that is adaptable to our societies, that we can make the arguments for our progress that is consistent with the values of our society. And they really want to come together across their borders to learn how better to do that. And today I think there's an especial need in that space. Okay, who wants to say something? Secretary Greening, we'll give the microphone to you quickly.
Thank you very much. I think you're absolutely right. If you're not winning this argument, you are losing it. I think we've seen that over recent years, and certainly within DFID. I think my issue really is that we have to do all of these things, and the problem is if you just do one of them, it doesn't really ultimately make enough of a difference. And I think the challenge is, how do you take a lot of tactical programs that we all have and make them into an overall strategy at a national level and an international level? My question really is about attitudes and men and boys, which I think often is not necessarily tagged onto the end, but I think it's key. And I also think it's a very long-term issue. It's very hard to track. So my question to the audience is, to the panel, is really, what's the best way to go about this? And what do you think the key ingredients for success on changing attitudes of men and boys are?
Anybody here or in the audience who wants to respond to this? Because this comes up every single time we have this discussion.
What worked for him? I mean, yeah.
Help me.
It's changing mindsets.
Yeah.
No, but it's part of the education. So I don't know in your country, but in my country, in the education system, there's nothing about that reality among young boy and young girl. Why don't we have at very young age some education about gender? It's not absolutely not part of the education system in my country, at least.
Thank you. Gina.
Thank you. Sorry, Gina Davis. I have an institute that studies, that researches gender depictions in media, especially entertainment media. And I think part of the problem, or part of the solution would be that men could see women in important positions and doing important things more. Right now, in so many areas of society, women are invisible, and there's not enough real-life examples of women leaders, women CEOs, powerful women in real life to have an impact on men, to say, wow, you know, that's really, women are great, we need to really do that. But if we could get more women in both entertainment media and news media, tell women's stories, see them, have them doing interesting things, playing scientists, and being really active parts of the solution. It's not working. Now it is. Hey, then it will change mindsets. There's already research that shows minds are changed by seeing women doing important things. And I think that's one powerful way that globally we could impact how men see women.
Okay. Here in the second row, and then we'll go over there. We have a lot of hands, so let's...
I didn't want Hillary to go. Actually, I wanted to ask her the question. Did she come back for a moment?
I think she had to go, so you can ask
well, the question was that Julia Gillard is here, our first female Prime Minister of Australia. I'm Serena Russo from Australia. And I was going to ask, just based on what Gina was saying, is Hillary going to run for presidency?
Well, she wasn't going to answer that question.
No, but she could have given us a little sort of expression of interest. We're all global women here. It would have been just lovely to know.
Okay, down back there.
Hi, thanks. I'm Charlotte Bunch, and I'm here for the Association for Women's Rights and Development, AWD. And AWD is involved in an initiative with Global Fund for Women, African Women's Development, and Mama Cash on linkages between the women's movement and the private sector around some of these initiatives. And I think the question that I wanted all the panelists or any who would like to speak to is the missing element in the discussion so far for me is the empowerment of women's groups and movements, women's rights groups, because we talk about these new initiatives, but the groups, the women's movement groups, the women's rights that have really been the power behind this are actually needing financial empowerment themselves. Most of the groups do not have the resources to really step up to the partnerships that are now before us. And if you look at the research, particularly on violence against women, the academic studies show that it's actually the existence of a strong women's rights or feminist organization that makes the most difference in advances on policy around violence and certainly reproductive rights, et cetera. So I would like for any of the panelists to pick up on sort of how do we strengthen the groups that are really key to this process, along with the individual women and the building of these partnerships. I wanted to ask, and maybe for later, sort of what you see as the difficult problems also in women's movements working in this engagement with the private sector.
Really good point. Let's take a couple, but that was a very important question. There's a hand there on this side. Do you have a mic?
Hi. I'm Melanne. My name is Florence Graves, and I'm the founding director of the Schuster Institute for Investigative Journalism at Brandeis University, which does focuses on human trafficking and modern-day slavery and gender injustice. And two of the things that I've learned, I don't have all of the research on it, but in the research that we've done, two of the things that have come up are exactly what you said. I believe in Sweden, they start gender education in preschool, and it goes all the way through. And I've been told that, you know, once that if you start in preschool, that it begins to change the attitudes of men and young girls and young boys, and that has made a significant difference in that country. I have not verified that myself. And the second thing is that there's an academic in the Boston area who has studied the extent to which pornography and the increasing pornography It is vastly more than it has ever been, is actually influencing how young boys view women. And that is something that's on a road that is a train that is almost unstoppable. That needs to be addressed as well.
Mm-hmm. Let's take one more and then send it back to the panel. Okay, right there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jamie Bechtel. I'm the CEO of New Course. 60% of the world's poor rely on natural resources for survival: food, water, energy, security. Most of those are women. And we talk a lot about economic empowerment, but we're not talking about environmental empowerment. And I spent 20 years in the environment community, and there are not women in those meetings. When we look at issues of human trafficking, the collapse of the environment drives human trafficking. But when we look at the restoration of environment, human trafficking is reduced, violence is reduced. So I think I'm the first person in the room to mention the word environment. I'd just be curious as to whether or not you think of that when you invest in these different spaces.
Okay, comments?
Yeah, maybe let me take up the first point on how the women's movement can really step up to its expectations and work with the private sector and also contribute to the work of the private sector. And I think this is really also taking it to the next stage, I would say, where being in one room together is, one thing. But now looking not only on how to work together, but also how we have a collective responsibility in funding the women's movement to be able to, step up and represent women in all those debates. I would like to, and we can't be conclusive now, but I'd like to take up that debate with a bit of a broader audience, as is represented here, to see also what the role of government can be, what the role of private sector can be, and how we can use, this is the good thing about government, the convening power of government to bring people together. So I'll take up that challenge, Charlotte. Thank you. And we'll see how we can take it to a next phase, because I do see how also in the emerging and emerge economies, it's very important that also women's NGOs are part and parcel of the debates on, how economic growth can be inclusive, for example. So that'll be nice.
Charlotte played such a pivotal role ramping up to Beijing and women's rights as human rights. And I wonder if, as we're 2 years away from that 20th anniversary, if this wouldn't be a very good issue to put on the table in terms of building this capacity.
I mean, one of the things that AWDF, that we found, one of the things that we found at the African Women's Development Fund very early on was that making grants wasn't enough, that we actually had to have grant making, capacity building, technical assistance, and then advocacy, because you have to change a context as well as changing individual work. But Charlotte is absolutely right. If we really want a pipeline of strong organizations that are making change on the ground, then we have to put money into women's organizations, but not just women's organizations, women's rights organizations, which are a little bit more difficult for people to feel comfortable with, but are just as important even so. And so the fact that we are finding it so hard, even as women's funds, to keep really good organizations going is something that we really need to address and that other people need to look at when they're thinking about different types of investments. And just to go on to the environment point, again, at AWDF, we don't have a separate environment or climate change program, but that runs through everything we do, because we see that the women who are most affected, if you're looking at economic empowerment, if you're looking at issues of women, peace and security, if you're looking at issues of governance, climate change and environmental protection runs all the way through that. So we don't have a separate program, but a lot of the organizations that we work with are dealing with those issues. And we've seen that that link between the environment and women's rights in the work that Wangari Maathai was doing, in which she started out as a women's rights program, but actually very quickly moved into a women's rights and environmental protection program. So on the continent, there are an awful lot of women's organizations who wouldn't call themselves an environmental group, but actually in the work they're doing on women's rights are very, very much involved in looking at mitigating climate change, protecting the environment, and moving forward.
Yeah. Could I just add to that last remark? I think working with the private sector for the past a year, a little bit more closely than in the years before, what I've seen, and this is true for many companies, but I think the Dutch multinationals are really leading the way. Companies like Unilever and DSM, they are very much focused on sustainability, and they have targets like in 2020. They want all their production facilities, all their local sources to be, sustainable. And there's a wonderful opportunity also to engage women in sustainable value chains, which leads the way, I would say, to environmentally responsible ways of doing business. So I think steps have been taken there, and it's a wonderful opportunity also for, again, different sectors of society to work together.
If I can add something about that, I completely share this. I should have broadened the vision about Kering. What we do about women is part of our sustainability program that is at the board level of the group, which is based on 4 pillars. One is humanity, then we have ecology, leadership, and creativity. And every program has to cross those 4 pillars. So when it comes to women and fight against violence and empowering women, we do that through the environmental program that we are developing. And it's been very, very efficient, I must say. It's true that involving women internally, by the way, and not only externally, on empowering program, and when you link that to environmental issues, you are much more efficient. And just to give you an example, we decided to the tanning process, for instance, is very important in my company, and is very, very heavily polluting the environment through the lead used in it. So we took the challenge 2 years ago to get rid of lead in the tanning process, keeping the requirement of luxury brands. And thanks to a group of women at Gucci and at Bottega Veneta, by the way, and it was really led by women, we found, and we're the first company in the world, we found 2 processes delivering the same level of quality and sustainability about leather without using lead. It was really crossing among them.
Hi, I'm Fran Drescher, and I'm the founder and president of the Cancer Schmancer movement, and I'm also a cancer survivor and a victim of a violent crime. I had been raped at gunpoint at one point in my life, and I think that I just want to be able to, in what we're talking about right now, refocus just slightly on our own lives and the lives of our families here in this country, because we remain a beacon for the rest of the world, and so often we look beyond our borders for what needs to be changed, and we neglect to see what's wrong with our own life, and really are not necessarily in a position to tell anybody else how to fix their problems, because we have so many problems that we negate in our own lives. And with 1 out of 2 men and 1 out of 3 women anticipated to get cancer in their lifetime, and the children of today, for the first time in U.S. history, expected to not live as long as their parents, for the first time in U.S. history, and babies being born pre-polluted with 200 to 300 chemicals found in the umbilical cord, and American women's breast milk has the highest percentage of flame retardant in it from any woman on the planet. We are slipping down a rabbit hole towards our own demise. And so that's the big problem. Why is it happening? Well, we, as the President's Cancer Panel of 2010 came out, which is a nonpartisan group of physicians, we are bombarding ourselves with chemicals on a daily basis. And as it turns out, the home is the most toxic place that we spend the most time in, and ironically have the most control over. What are we putting in our mouth, on our skin, all of our daily care products, and what are we cleaning and gardening with is an excellent way to begin. So we at the Cancer Schmancer movement is starting an education, motivation, and activation program called Detox Your Home. And we hope to make Detox Your Home the don't drink and drive of the 21st century, because Americans and around the world are feeling like they have cure fatigue. We've taken the walks, we've written the checks, where is the cure? And this enables us to actually reduce our risk of a whole host of diseases by simply making healthier choices in how we live within our homes. And once we start to focus that locally on ourselves and our families, we can begin to see a domino effect of an environmental change that keeps spreading out further and further and further. And what we're doing is leveraging the fact that women, no matter how high they are in the corporate world or in government, remain the caregivers to the child, the spouse, and the elder in almost every home worldwide. And I'm a public diplomacy envoy for the State Department. I speak all over the world and at our military. And this is true everywhere. In addition to that, we remain the largest consumers. So with Detox Your Home education program and initiative in Washington and national campaign to get the conversation going, we're going to engage consumers to not only make healthier choices, but actually dictate manufacturing trends without having to deal with regulation, which is a dead end in Washington right now. So if anybody is interested in that,
Fran is here. She will.
Thank you.
Okay, and the last word there. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've enjoyed everything the panel said. I want to thank each of you for your time. I'm sure everybody does. I am a woman entrepreneur. I'm committed to women's entrepreneurship. And in 2010, so I'm Jane Werwind. I'm the owner of Dermalogica skincare products. And in 2010, our commitment with Kiva was to fund women into their own business or start a business, grow or start it. We funded over 36,000 in 54 countries in the last 2.5 years. So I feel really good about that. But everyone's doing great work in funding women. In my industry, which is the professional salon and spa industry, we put more women into business than any other industry in the world. We're an industry of entrepreneurial women. Most of our 120,000 skin therapists around the world have a business of between 100,000 and, if they're really doing well, maybe close to 1 million. But I want to see us also focusing on getting women from what I call the mezzanine level up to the top floor. Very few women entrepreneurs grow their business above $2 million. If they do, they rarely get to 10 million, and very, very few 10 million and above. It's very crowded at the bottom. It's very lonely at the top. And I think that part of what we talk about, and I'm very, as I've told you, committed to the developing world and growing women up. Kiva is a micro-lending company. We're very focused on that. But I want to see in our developed countries getting women from that mezzanine level up so that we don't have to have the conversation of how men will help empower us onto boards. We will be right there, equal footing with equal say in everything. And hopefully maybe in future conversations we can talk about that as a strategy as well. So thank you
very much. So I want to thank all of you. I'm going to turn this over to Penny for any final words. And before she takes the microphone, I personally want to thank the panel. I think they were terrific from all different perspectives. And to be continued.
Thank you so much to the panelists, and thank you so much, Ambassador Verveer. So the way I want to conclude this is with a call to action. There is only so much CGI can do in terms of programming and bringing you all together in spaces like this. the work that needs to be done through your commitments, through your partner commitments, is by what you do when you're out there. And that is how you talk about integrating girls and women, how you talk about how do you get them into leadership positions, how do you educate them. And so that call to action is you have 3 days to do a lot of work, bring in a lot of new allies into CGI and into your commitments. And we are really, really excited for the next 3 days. Thank you guys so much for all your time.